have gone through 3 different names over the last 40 years. But throughout their names, they've had one thing in common: making some fast Fords even faster. And sometimes they don't even tackle the fast ones. It's SVT. SVT didn't actually start out as SVT though. It started out as SVO, or Special Vehicle Operations. This division of Ford was formed in 1981 with 3 objectives. 1. Compete in motor racing. 2. Expand the performance parts catalog. And 3. Produce specialized performance road cars. And let's tackle the first objective: motor racing. SVO set its sights straight on the SCCA Trans Am series with heavily modified Mustangs. And they were pretty good. In the first 2 years of 1985-1986, they scored a third of all races in the championships. That's pretty darn good. And then, just 3 years later, they had won 46 races. More than all manufacturers competing in Trans Am put together. So, they were clearly very, very good at motor racing. But what about the other aspects? Like, say, making performance cars? Well, they only got to make one, but it was a pretty darn good one. It was the SVO Mustang. Now, the gas crisis by the 80s had left quite an impact on the American auto industry. They were crap. We had 6.6 liter V8s making 170 horsepower. It was kind of a joke, to be honest. So, SVO did not go with a V8 when they decided to make their souped-up Mustang. No, 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 no. They went with a 4-cylinder out of a Ford Pinto. But they did beef it up a little bit, and they gave it a big old turbocharger, which meant 205 horsepower and a respectable 240 foot-pounds of torque. And even while getting, well, not while getting, but it could get 22 mpg, while also being able to do 0 to 60 in under 7 seconds. In 1980s, that was witchcraft for an American muscle car. That was also the only road car SVO actually made, because in 1983, the SVT was founded. And after the SVO Mustang was discontinued in 1986, SVT took over all operations from SVO, and SVO ceased to exist. So, SVT, their first job was not a Mustang, it was a pickup truck. The F-150 was America's best-selling vehicle, and they wanted to make it a bit faster. So, they found a naturally aspirated V8, 5.8 liter, I will add, that made 250 horsepower. And they stuck it in a 1993 F-150 with some better suspension and good brakes, which is critical. And they called it the Lightning. Is that not a fantastic name? And they brought it back at the turn of the century, and by 2004, it had a Triton 5.4 liter V8, good for 380 horsepower and 450 pounds-feet of torque. That is more than the Ferrari F50. That was good for 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds. That was faster than a Mustang. Speaking of Mustangs, while they were working on the Lightnings, they were also working on this thing called the Cobra. Not anything to do with the Shelby Cobra, no. Shelby had long ceased their partnership with Ford, so it was just called the SVT Cobra. But it started out as a Fox body, believe it or not, in 1993, the last generation of Fox body, I will add, with 240 horsepower. But out of the original Cobras before the SN95 was taken over, they only made about 5,100 of them, and only 107 of them were the ultra-rare, super cool Cobra R version. And since there was such a lukewarm reception to the Cobra R, they brought it back for 95, which had a 300 horsepower V8 made it to a 5-speed manual. And only 250 of them were made. And the only way you could get one is if you were actively involved in motorsport. You had to have a racing license or a racing team. That is freaking sick. And then there was the next generation, the new Edge as it was called, and the SVT Cobra followed suit. The base Cobra was rated at 320 horsepower and could do the quarter mile in under 14 seconds. That's pretty good for the year 2000. But true to SVT form, they did not just leave it as the base model, because the Cobra R just had to return. And it is one of my favorites, if not my favorite, new Edge Mustang. Okay? They dropped the suspension and ride height by an inch over the base car. The engine was tuned up to make 390 horsepower. It featured aggressive and massive aerodynamics, including a fully functional front splitter and rear wing. It even had optional cutouts in the engine compartment that could reduce engine temperature to keep it nice and cool in there. All in all, that meant not only could it handle, it could also have a top speed of almost 180 miles an hour. Oh, and there were only 300 made, and they were only available in red, which is fine because red looks fantastic on this car. So, there was no Cobra R anymore, but don't worry, because the best was arguably yet to come. For the final years of the SVT Cobra, they made the Terminator. Yes, they actually called the car the Terminator Cobra. That combines the two best things, Arnold Schwarzenegger and a deadly venomous snake. This thing featured a cast iron 4.6 liter supercharged V8, making 390 horsepower and 390 torque. 0 to 60, 4.5 seconds, quarter mile under 13. In 2003, they were making some pretty damn fast Mustangs pickups. But that wasn't even their best. They made the Contour. Wait, what? Yeah, they made a Contour with 200 horsepower, and while it was fast for a Contour, it was still a Contour. That wasn't what I was talking about. Moving on, what I was really talking about was the GT90 in 1995. You see, Ford wanted to make a concept car relating to the GT40 as a successor of sorts. So, they started rummaging through their parts bin, and they found an old XJ220 Jag. And then they built off of that. They put a carbon fiber components on, an aluminum frame, ceramic body panels, very similar to those used on the space shuttle, I will add. And then the crown jewel was the engine. A brand spanking new, built from scratch, 5.9 liter quad turbocharged V12, making 770 horsepower. It was the most powerful road-going car ever made up to that point. In 1995, it could do 0 to 60 in 3.1 seconds, the quarter mile in 10.9, and it had a top speed of 253 miles an hour. That's Bugatti Veyron territory a decade before it came out. And Ford didn't make it. It was only a concept, and then they decided we didn't want to make it. Where do you go after making the Terminator of Mustangs, the supercar of pickups, and the fastest road car the world had ever seen up to that point? Well, you start modifying the Focus. Yeah. Now, this is very similar and yet different to the RS. You see, the RS was tuned by a little company in Europe called Rally Sport Ford. Basically, Europe's tuning division, similar to SVT, is a long story. That had 200 horsepower. SVT wasn't allowed to do that. So, they featured a reworked 2-liter i4, making 170 horsepower, and that was very good for a hot hatchback then. It also featured larger brakes, better anti-roll bars, and stiffer suspension. So it's like the Focus RS from Europe, but a bit slower. It's okay, I'm not jealous at all. Nope, at least we got something for once, damn it. They also did much of the design and development on the Ford GT, the new one. Yeah, the 2005, which is a very good car. I covered this a while ago, actually. But if you want their next big project, it was another F-150, but you know, making an F-150 track ready, it's just really hard, and we don't really want to do that again. It took a lot of work. So, they did the next best thing. Built a Raptor. Another badass name, I'll add. These guys are fantastic at naming things. We got the Raptor. We got the Terminator Cobra. I mean, come on, guys. The Lightning. These guys are fantastic at naming stuff. So the Raptor was a high-performance, off-road, road-legal desert raid truck, essentially, built around an F-150. But it featured a 6.2-liter, naturally aspirated V8, making 500 horsepower. It also featured 35-inch off-road tires, a proper skid plate in case you hit stuff while going 120 miles an hour off-road. It also featured 17-inch suspension, so it was highly unlikely you were going to hit anything at all. And the new one they were making features a twin-turbocharged 3.5-liter V6, making 500 foot-pounds torque. That's pretty good. Now, the final project SVT worked on was a very special one. Yes, they partnered up with Shelby American, to make the GT 500. It had a 5.8-liter supercharged V8, making 662 brake horsepower, and it could do 202 miles an hour in a Mustang. That is, to this date, the fastest Mustang ever recorded from the factory. It could also do 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Well, how? Well, apart from, the power, it also had a reworked body panels to give a 14% reduction in drag and a 67% increase in downforce, so you didn't lose control. Also, to make sure you could stop that nearly 2-ton piece of machinery going 200 miles an hour, they gave it better brakes and better suspension, which is nice. And the car was so good, it was the final car Carroll Shelby gave his blessing on. I'm not crying, you are. Now, why did I say this is the last car that SVT made? Well, It's because in 2015, Ford merged Europe's tuning division, Team Rally Sport, or RS, the Australian tuning division, FPV, and the US tuning division, SVT. They merged them all under one roof, called Ford Performance. And their first project under Ford Performance was to make a Mustang competitive in GT Le Mans. And they looked at it for 5 seconds and said, "This isn't possible, you morons, what are you doing?" And without their boss's permission, started to work on a brand spanking new supercar from the ground up. It was called the GT, and again, you know the rest, because it's one of the greatest supercars made in the last 10 years. But they tuned up the Ford Focus into an all-wheel drive 350 horsepower monster. That was the benchmark for all modern super hot hatches. And now they're making SUVs, like the Explorer and the Edge ST. Yay. But hey, they're making some cool cars as well, like the Ford Shelby GT350, which was launched in 2016. It was basically making a Mustang a track weapon, okay? It featured a Voodoo V8, that's the actual name. Again, these guys with the fantastic names. Naturally aspirated, all-aluminum V8, 526 horsepower, red line above 8,000. It was amazing. And to go with that amazing engine, they had a car weighing less than 3,300 pounds, because it had magnetic suspension, 295 tires on the back, reworked functional aerodynamics, utilization of carbon fiber wheels, and it was nuts. They made an even lighter version that was stripped of all the bare essentials called the R. It's freaking amazing. And arguably more impressive is the newest addition, the GT500, unveiled in 2019 at the Detroit Auto Show. The Predator supercharged V8. God, what is with the names of these guys? They're fantastic. It makes 760 horsepower and can do 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Even with a 4,200 pound curb weight, it's quite heavy, and yet it can still pull a G in the corners because of all their fancy wizardry they've done. Now, if you recall from quite a while ago, the original goal of SVO was to be dominant in racing, and SVT/Ford Performance carries on that tradition. In 2011, a privateer F-150 Raptor became the first American car to win the Super Production class at the Paris-Dakar Rally. Also the only American car to win the Super Production class at the Dakar Rally. In 2016, on their first try, they won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the GTLM class of the new GT. They also won the World's Continental Sports Car Challenge with the GT350R in 2016. And here in North America, they competed in the brutal Baja 1000 and completed the 1,000 kilometer journey in a bone stock F-150 Raptor. That's pretty impressive. It's one of the first vehicles ever to be able to drive home on the road after completing the most brutal endurance race in the Western Hemisphere. In 2018, just to rub salt on the wounds from 2016, they won the IMSA GTLM Championship outright. They also won the 2018 Drivers and Manufacturers Championship in the World Rally Series. And in 2019, they absolutely dominated V8 supercars, winning 2/3 of all races with the new Mustang supercar. Yeah. Safe to say, they have not forgotten their heritage of utterly dominating motor racing. So, what's next for these guys? Well, Ford has potentially expressed interest in the new Le Mans category, considering it just merged with IMSA's category, and that was one of Ford's sticking requirements. So maybe they can make a new prototype car out of the GT. That would be pretty sick, and it would definitely be doable. But that is just a hypothetical speculation. In the meantime, they're probably gonna make another SUV a bit faster. Yay?